Hey friends, good morning. It's 5:58 here. I've been up for about an hour. I'm trying to get things rolling early in the morning so we can just get things done the rest of the day, because tomorrow is a teaching day for me, but we'll see how it works. I hope there's sound now. Yeah, I forgot to unmute it for a moment. I will start promptly at 6. In a minute. This is going to be fun. Okay, let's see. So yeah, I'm just gonna babble a little bit, and then I will let you guys ask questions and all that kind of good stuff. We'll just get a little conversation going here with my usual small audience, and that's okay. Let me push a few buttons here. A little glitch there as we switch over to, I'm using Keynote to show you a few slides first. So we'll talk about this for a little bit. Okay, promptly at 6, here we go. So today what I'm going to talk about is a little bit of Islamic embryology. It is not a topic I ever anticipated getting sucked into. Embryology, yes, but Islamic embryology, no. And we'll start with a little clip from a video that Rebecca Watson made. She recorded this little event in Dublin in 2011, in which I was confronted by a small group of people from the Islamic Education and Research Academy, the IERA, who tried to convince me that the Koran contained the truth about embryology. Oh boy. Yeah, so I'm gonna show you a couple minutes of that just to warm you up while I drink my coffee. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about it. Uh-oh, is the sound from this coming through? It is not playing any sound. So maybe I won't be doing this. Anyway, that's Hamza Sortzis on the right, and that's me on the left. There's a little crowd of onlookers there. I don't know why my sound is dead on my end. Maybe it's okay. I doubt it's okay on your end. Anyway, what were they doing? Well, they confronted me, and they were trying to argue that the Koran contained the truth about embryology, that Mohammed, oh, and there's Aaron Ra, he was chiming in. It was loads of fun. Anyway, so they were trying to make the point that there's a divine truth inside of the Koran that Muhammad could not have known unless he was a conduit for God's information. So they were trying to argue that there was so many deep insights in the Quran into embryology that a 7th or 8th century man who didn't own a microscope could not possibly have known. And therefore it proves that the Quran is correct. Yeah, it was pretty silly. They didn't know who I was. I'm just this old guy who strolled out outside the hotel, and they started haranguing me and telling me about how development works. And I had to tell them that, but I'm a developmental biologist, which set them back for about a second, but then they charged on and did some other stuff. Now, why is embryology such a hot topic among the Islamic defenders of the Quran? Well, I have to blame this guy. This is Keith L. Moore. Keith Moore, I don't want to make it sound like he's a bad guy because he's not. He's a Canadian embryologist and anatomist. He did a lot of great work. He's best known because he published some of the most authoritative texts on human embryology that were for years used in lots and lots of, I think they still are actually. He wrote multiple editions. He got a couple of different versions of his human embryology text, and they were used all over the place, in particular in nursing schools and medical schools. So, yeah, he made a real contribution. Then in the 1980s, he was invited by an Islamic group to come speak and in Saudi Arabia. And while he was there, he was subjected to the blandishments of the Muslim apologists. And so, to read this middle paragraph. For the past 3 years, I have worked with the Embryology Committee of King Abdulaziz University in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, helping them to interpret the many statements in the Koran and the Sunnah referring to human reproduction and prenatal development, which is a good thing. This is the job of an educator, and I'm glad he went over there to talk to people there, talk to academics in Saudi Arabia, and help them understand human embryology a little better. But here's where it goes off the rails. At first, I was astonished by the accuracy of the statements that were recorded in the 7th century AD before the science of embryology was established. This isn't quite true. Okay, embryology was around before this, long before this. And he says, although I was aware of the glorious history of Muslim scientists in the 10th century AD and some of their contributions to medicine, I knew nothing about the religious facts and beliefs contained in the Quran and Sunnah. It is important for Islamic and other students to understand the meaning of these Quranic statements about human development based on current scientific knowledge. The interpretations of the verses in the Quran and Sunnah, translated by Sheikh Azandani, are, to the best of my knowledge, accurate. Oh, these words. They get so twisted and interpreted. And yeah, so, a couple of things I would point out here is, at first I was astonished by the accuracy of the statements, and then the meaning of these, and then this bit down here, they're, to the best of my knowledge, accurate. What does this mean? This is the source of all the problems, because the people behind these conferences took these words and translated them into a wholehearted endorsement of all of Islam. Oh, and I don't know what Moore was thinking. He was probably thinking, oh man, these people really are nice. They've invited me over. They put me up in this gorgeous hotel and given me these wonderful meals, and they have fawned over me and praised me. I'm not going to just start yelling at them and say they're wrong. I have to find a way to be gracious and thankful for this opportunity, this ongoing opportunity. And it wouldn't surprise me if you got some funding from them. Okay. Not to put it down to entirely venal purposes. It's because apparently Keith Moore was a nice guy who was generous to his hosts. That's kind of it. But then it's gotten way out of hand. So let's take a look at the verses. Oh, I'll also mention that Azandani guy is going to come up again. Azandani was sort of the major interface between Keith Moore and the Islamic world, and put a lot of work into translating Moore's books. Okay, so the verses. Here are the verses, and it's pathetic. Okay, now this is one translation. I'll show you a little table. There's multiple translations. It's like translating the Bible from Hebrew or Aramaic. There's choices made, but let's just say for now this is a good translation. So it's all of 2 sentences. That's it. 2 sentences in the Koran. And they say, we created man from an essence of clay, then we placed him as a drop of fluid in a safe place. Then we made that drop of fluid into a clinging form, and then we made that form into a lump of flesh. And we made that lump into bones, and we clothed those bones with flesh. And later we made him into other forms. Glory be to God, the best of creators. Okay, you cannot claim that that is accurate. Moore did. And I think he really was being extremely generous. This is pitiful. There's hardly anything there. Let me say, though, the good parts of this. There were competing schools of thought in embryology for many, many centuries. Hippocrates, for instance, believed that the embryo was fully formed, just tiny, inside of the uterus of the mother, and that development was solely a process of growth, expansion of that thing that was divinely placed right there to grow in the uterus. Aristotle had a different view. He believed in an epigenetic process. That is, he thought that initially what was placed there was an amorphous fluid that didn't have human shape, that there wasn't a tiny baby in there, and that there was a process of condensation and coagulation. He used those kinds of words to describe how that fluid changed to become the embryo itself. So these 2 schools of thought were fighting it out for a long time. It was kind of a low intensity fight, but yeah, people were arguing about this stuff. And that was the major contention in embryology for many centuries. What Mohammed has done here is he's plunked down soundly on the side of Aristotle. That's the main good takeaway point I would take from this, is that he endorsed this idea of progressive development of the tissues. And it wasn't just growth. It wasn't just poof, you planted an embryo and then it grew. That there was all kinds of changes that had to occur over time. So that's a good point. I think that is a good message that he was giving in here, in his very, very short, abbreviated message about embryology. And that's about all you can take away from it, because the rest of this is vague. This is not detailed. To say that it is accurate is stretching the term accurate. It really is so general and vague that it really doesn't mean much. Now, another point that the IERA was trying to make was that, well, Mohammed couldn't have known any of this, that he didn't have a gigantic library full of books that would have allowed him to look into this, and he didn't have a microscope, and he didn't have access to embryos, so how could he possibly know this except by the power of his divine connection to Allah? Okay, the problem is that this level of information was kind of the common currency of the academic world at the time. That if you sat down and just talked to any scholar who actually studied this stuff, this is what they would tell you, is they would probably talk about, well, there's these 2 views. Hippocrates said, yeah, you got an embryo and it grew bigger. And Aristotle was saying, yeah, that now that you actually had to accumulate tissues that formed gradually over time, something like that. And that got translated into what is really a colloquial summary of a common academic conversation in the 7th century. Okay. You just can't overinterpret this. What it tells me is that the Islamic world from the very beginning was connected to the rest of the world, to Africa, Europe, and Asia. They were in a good place to make those kinds of connections. And they were smart people who were listening to, the merchants coming through, who were looking at what was being taught at schools outside of Arabia. Yeah, this is a very human sort of thing to do, right? I think it's commendable. No problem. But then to claim this is accurate. Well, I've got one little example I want to give right now of how I see this. So let me put on my prophet's hat and pretend I have a conduit to the divine. So I'm saying I have the divine power to see your mom right now. I'm talking about you right there, the person listening to this right this instant. I have actually received a vision from the gods of your mom. And I can prove it because I'm going to draw a picture of your mother, and you are going to be astounded at its accuracy. Here's your mom. Okay. You can't argue with me. That looks just like your mother, doesn't it? I mean, notice, this would only be possible if God had shown me the truth, had revealed to me the face of your mother. And don't argue with me. It's very accurate. Your mother has two eyes, right? Or at least she was born with two eyes. She has a nose, a mouth. She has hair on top of her head. She has ears. Clearly, my diagram, my illustration is highly accurate and very precise. Thank you very much. Now you can send me 10% of your income every year. I'm looking forward to it. Okay, but let's get serious here. Yeah, you can clearly see the problem here. You can't just show some vague bit of fluff and claim, yeah, I've got everything down cold. I know exactly what this was like. I have done an accurate rendition of your mother. Uh, here's a little piece of the story. So this is I was sent by Gary Dargan, who has done some work in this area and knows some of this stuff. So Keith Moore wrote a book called The Developing Human. And there was a special third edition put out in 1983 by Azandani. Remember, Azandani was the guy I mentioned earlier. So Azandani came out with his own version of it was an annotated version of Keith Moore's text in Arabic that was published in the Islamic world. So it made a bunch of Islamic additions to the text. Now, you can break down the Quranic text as you see over there in these different, and this is showing some of these different translations there. So if you are an Islamic scholar, this is a really useful thing to be able to see that, yeah, here are these different interpretations. Of course, if you're a real Islamic scholar, you probably can read Arabic, but you can see that there are these different stages there. And what Azandani did was break down the descriptions of Keith Moore, the standardized Carnegie classification system for human embryos, which contains 23 stages. And remember that number, 23. So, if you just look at the standard texts on human embryology, they'll tell you, well, there's these roughly 23 steps we can categorize them by. So, if you know the morphological features and you've got an embryo in front of you, you can tell how far along it was. It's fairly detailed. Again, read Keith Moore's embryology text, and it goes into all the little pieces of the embryo that are forming at these different times. And what Azandani did was reduced it to three, just three. Why do you think it was 3? Well, if you look over here, here are the 3 that, there were 2 sentences in the Koran, and they mentioned these 3 rough terms to describe different stages in development. So that's kind of it. So what Azandani did was strip out most of the information about human embryology and treat these somewhat casual colloquial classifications of a 2-sentence text into the details. Oh, I don't know if you hear that, but the snowplows are going by right now, clearing our roads. So you hear a little bit of beeping in the background, maybe. Okay, so this is a little shady, all right, to claim that everything was so accurate, and then you throw out most of the information that people like Keith Moore had presented to you about human embryology. But that's what they did. Okay, but then you're saying, okay, but Keith Moore, he said it was accurate. Sure, yeah, he said some nice things in the foreword to that edition. But here's another little anecdote from the Islam papers. This is, again, the kinds of things that were being thrown at me. So he says, for instance, the Holy Book claims that at one point the embryo looks like a small piece of meat which can be chewed, or mudga, and Moore consents. By golly, it does, sorta. Agreeing and signaling to the knowledge we have about the structure and appearance of the actual embryo, which actually comes into a stage, yeah, etc. This is the kind of small agreement that the Islamic apologist sees upon the claim that, yeah, Muhammad had detailed knowledge of embryology. That is not more agreeing that, oh yeah, this is a good, accurate description. It's more going along with his generous hosts. Okay. When you look at the reality of embryology, it's a lot more complicated than that. So I'll just throw this out here. This is from a paper that's describing some of the details of embryology. And what you've got is a couple of details that Muhammad didn't get into, and that is, it's not strictly a sequential process. That I would quibble with more on this one. That the whole idea of putting it into the Carnegie series is to imply that there's a specific sequence, that everything works through in this particular way. But when you actually look at the small details of how embryology proceeds, that's not it at all. There's 1,000 little processes that are going on simultaneously. That what you see early in embryology is a divergence of tissues, as you see here. That so you start off with a stem cell that's then going to divide, and it's going to go into these different processes. So here we got, osteogenesis. It's going to make bone. It's going to make cartilage. It's going to make muscle. It's going to make the bone marrow, which is an immune system tissue. It's going to make the tendons and ligaments. It's going to make fat. All of these things are going on at the same time, and to reduce it to, oh, here, 3 stages, and one of them is it looks like a chewed piece of meat, is doing a great disservice to embryology. Okay, so anyway, to make a long story short, I went back and forth with Hamza Tsortsis during that afternoon session, and then for years afterwards, he was sending me all this stuff. He wrote a long rebuttal, which was ridiculous, to what I said, and tried to rescue the Koran as a repository of deep embryological knowledge. He was constantly sending me invitations. I got multiple invitations to fly at his expense to London and stay in a nice hotel, give a talk. This is exactly what they did to Keith Moore. This is a really common thing as an academic gets invited to some exotic place to give a conference speech or even participate in a debate. And I suspect this would have turned into a debate. And depending on the wealth of the host, you can get put up in some pretty nice places. I've been in a range of places, from cheap little shoddy Motel 6s to pretty ritzy hotels in places like London myself. I didn't take him up on any of this. It's just gilding the lily to take those two sentences from the Koran and turn them into this elaborate thesis about how embryology proceeds. And more than once, I rebutted him on my blog, and that was my message: is primarily, no, you cannot do this. You cannot claim that two sentences that are probably poetic in the original source are doctrinal scientific facts. It just doesn't work that way. Anyway, I did get, after multiple events where Hamza Tzortzis accused me of being a liar and a fraud and all this nasty stuff, I think I wore him down a little bit, because Tzortzis eventually came to a really interesting rationalization for the Koran, and I'll show you that this is kind of fascinating. So what did Tzortzis do? He came out with this statement, and some of these I agree with. Okay, so Tzortzis says the Koran allows multiple and multi-level meanings. Yes, that's true of any text. Detailed analysis of text. Any text can reveal levels of meaning. So that's true. This is good. Then he says, our understanding of natural phenomena and science changes and improves with time. Why, yes, I certainly hope so. That's what science does, is it tries to get better and better knowledge about how science works. Then number 3 is an assertion with no evidence. So he says the Koran is not inaccurate or wrong. Why? Why are you saying that? Why can't a text be inaccurate? I would say, for instance, Darwin's Origin of the Species. There were inaccurate and wrong things in that text. It's fine. Get over it. Do studies and look and figure out, oh, here's where he went wrong, and this is why he went wrong, and here's the correct answer. But you can't do that with the Koran. That's a shame. Now, then it gets interesting, because how is he going to handle any conflict between the Koran and science then? So he says, in the case of any irreconcilable difference between a Quranic assertion and a scientific one, the following must be done. Find meanings within the verse to correlate with the scientific conclusion. All right, that's kind of standard, right? This is what you have to do. You've got a holy text, you believe in it. There's facts and science and evidence and observations that counter something in that. Well, then clearly what you have to do is reinterpret the text, right? That's what he's saying. Find a meaning within that text that fits with the science. All right, then the second point is the weird one. If no words can match the scientific conclusion, well, then the science must be wrong. It must be improved. Yeah, we can't change the Koran, can't change our interpretation of the Koran. We can only change the science, which is, creepy, weird. Okay. But then his last point, the last point I appreciate. I think this is actually the best way to do this. Find a non-scientific meaning. So the verse itself may be pertaining to non-physical things, such as the unseen, spiritual, or existential realities. Lovely. Sure. What I would say is, if it were up to me to interpret the Koran, and I am not an expert on the Koran. I do not want to pretend to be, but as a layman, if I were confronted with, as I was with that verse, I would say, well, here's a way to interpret this. This is an intelligent man trying to explain the common academic discussions of the day into a poetic guide for human living. We're done. That's not disparaging Muhammad or the Quran. It's just saying, okay, yeah, but it's not a scientific text. Here's this presumably well-meaning person who's looking at the world around him, listening to learned men, and taking that information and putting it into a little fragment of a verse in his long poem in which he's explaining how to live the good life. And what's wrong with that? The problem is, of course, this point. If no words can match the scientific conclusion, then the science is to be improved. And that's clearly what they were doing. That encounter in Dublin was me meeting a couple of representatives of a very doctrinaire version of Islam who were unwilling to accept the third point, the final point there, and were instead insisting that I was wrong in interpreting the science, that I needed to fix my science to bring it in line with the Koran. And that's unfortunate. Okay, one last thing I'll mention is this is not a Muslim bashing session. This is one example where the Islamic students were a little off the wall. But I will remind you that Christianity is just as bad, if not worse. So here's some text for you to read. This is the entirety of Genesis 1. And it's the same thing. This is vague. It's got incorrect sequences of things happening. It doesn't fit the physical evidence. Yet there are a great many people who treat this as the literal truth. And it's longer than those two sentences in the Quran because the Bible in chapter 1 is trying to explain the entirety of the history of the universe. The Quran is just taking a little piece, just talking about human development. So they're pretty much comparable in their investment in rationalizing the world with their religious beliefs. It's just Christianity is just, speaking of small pieces of flesh that need to be chewed, is biting off the entire cosmos and chomping on it in Genesis 1. And it's really silly. Yet this set of words is what organizations like Answers in Genesis, creation research, all that kind of stuff is built on, is claiming that this is good science. It's not. If we just step back for a moment, I would tell all those people, I would tell Ken Ham and Kent Hovind and Eric Hovind and everyone involved in this enterprise, look at this sentence right here. Take your book of Genesis and find a non-scientific meaning, because the people who wrote the book of Genesis were not doing science. That it's got poetry and beauty and language and social mores, all this stuff built into it. That's what you should be talking about, not treating this as literal science. Okay, let me stop this here. We're going to stop that. I'm going to stop this. Okay, and find my way back to here. All right, hello everyone. I gotta find. Oh yeah. When I do this, I end up with a welter of windows open. Okay, we are looking in the chat here. Yeah. All right. Show that. Come on, you can show that. Okay, so we got some comments here. Drag their sorry asses in the mud left and right. Yeah. And I'm fed up with the Islamic embryology bullshit. Exactly. I am too. It's why I did not participate in any of their debates, is because it's absurd. You've got two stanzas, two sentences, and a little bit of poetry, and you're trying to turn this into a gigantic issue for science, and it's not. Yeah, the video playing has no sound. I'm sorry about that. I will look at it. I've switched machines here today, so I didn't have it configured properly, apparently. Yes, they so Joey E says it was funny when you said you were an embryologist, like change the topic to geology. That happens to me all the time. You know, I'm not a famous person. I'm not Richard Dawkins or something. So I get into these debates and they have no idea what to expect from me, and they start rattling off their canned spiel at me, and then they hit some subject I'm familiar with, and I start giving them details, and they ask, "Oh, but how do you know this stuff?" And I tell them, "Yeah, this is my specialty. I know. I've got a degree in this. Okay, I've got a doctoral degree in developmental biology." And yeah, like these guys, they switch to some other topic, to geology maybe, and I don't know that much geology. Tiny bit of geology. Kevin says, doesn't that prove ancient aliens instead? Okay. This is what we mean by alternative interpretations. You could take this and interpret it any way you want. Let's see. So which is it, clay or fluid? Either one. You can play with this however you want. Yeah. I had no idea our essence was phyllosilicate. I don't know what see, I'm not a geologist. You'll have to explain that. But anyway, who is the we in the text? Oh, I think the we in the text is Allah, or at least Muhammad, the prophet of Allah. So this was written by Muhammad, and it's kind of like the royal we he's using here. Yeah. Oh, here's a good point. A common statement I see on Twitter a lot. I have also seen two imams spending hours arguing on how do we find the right one. Yes, that there's a lot of this that is a matter of interpretation. You got a vague general statement, and yet it's in your sacred holy book. You've got to spend time expanding on it, interpreting it, and often what happens is we treat the interpretation as the totality of the meaning of the text. So yeah, this has happened with Christians and the first chapter of Genesis, where this has become, to some Christians, I don't think a majority, although the majority haven't thought deeply about it. The majority have just, to some of them, have decided that this has to be interpreted in a particular way. It has to be interpreted literally. That when the book says a day, it means a literal 24-hour day, for instance, which was not a premise held in Christianity even 100 years ago. It just wasn't there. It's a recent addition. So yeah, they get themselves progressively locked into these very, very narrow interpretations. Oh, okay. I had somebody agree that looks just like their mom, doesn't it? Scientist and artist. Yeah, that's me. Great. Okay. Yeah, but the point of that is, you know, that if I showed you that picture and said that's a picture of your mom, how would you argue against that? You know, you would agree, well, yeah, that's kind of a caricature of a human being. It's got two eyes, a mouth, and a nose. Uh, but what you would say is there's nothing specific enough in that cartoon for me to recognize it as my mother. It doesn't do enough work. That a good caricature takes specific features in the individual and puts them into the drawing, and this was very vague in general, and that's the case for the Koran's version of embryology. It's the cartoon version of embryology. Good evening from Darwin, Australia. Hi there. Okay. Yeah, somebody appreciated my demonstration. Yeah, that's the fundamental thing about what they're saying is it's not specific enough. There's no detail there. There's no science there. So yeah, it just doesn't work. London is exotic now. Well, hey, I'm in the middle of the continent of North America, and that makes London very exotic. I've been there a few times. It felt exotic. It was nice. People talk funny there. It's really weird. It's like they almost speak English. Oh, all the English people now hate me. Sorry, no. I know you were first. Uh, oh yeah, they went switched to the mountains have roots. Uh, that in geology you might say that a mountain has a root. Mountains extend deeper than just the surface. It is not analogous or homologous to plant roots. So, it's just, you just can't do that. Yeah, okay. A couple points here. They still limit their literalism, though. I see no justification to take the day literal while reading the Bible and not expect that. Yeah, and at the same time, there's other pieces that describe a flat Earth, but they're picking and choosing. Yeah, even people like Ken Ham and Kent Hovind are cafeteria Christians, so they're picking the bits that they find acceptable, and a flat Earth is not acceptable to most people because there's so much evidence coming. Just the fact that we have to deal with time zones here is the reality of the globe smacking us in the head and telling us, yeah, it's round. There's different places on Earth. But they think that they can just ignore evolution. They can ignore the history of their planet. Somebody says it's quite disgusting to me that people confront the modern world to fit the tenets of Iron Age literature, but still rely on and benefit from all the great things science has afforded us. I might be a little less pissed off about that because, the deeper you get into the science, the more you realize that most people are relying on fairly rough heuristics to understand what's going on around them. That I mentioned I don't know geology very well. So, I've got a little bit of it. And so I can sort of look at the world and see the geology there and understand it as an outcome of natural geological processes. Like in this area, for instance, a lot of glaciology occurred. But I can't claim that I really understand it deeply. I'm benefiting from geology without studying it deeply. So that's not great. Okay. But we all have to do that because there's limited time in the day. We can't master all disciplines at all times. Okay, so we get a little pushback here. Altaf Nizamani. He says, "Dear sir, is there any book in your knowledge which refutes the Koran's version of embryology?" You missed the point. there is No, Quranic version of embryology. There's two sentences. Uh, in my charitable interpretation of them, the Koran has come down on the side of epigenesis, which is a very broad category. Okay, that's just saying that there's progressive development of the tissues of the embryo, and so they've come down that. And so I'm not going to refute that. I'm going to say, yeah, that's pretty much how we understand embryology now. But there are no details there. Uh, I would also add that, if you have a deeper understanding of embryology, as I mentioned a little while ago, that what you see in embryology is a great deal of parallelism, that things are developing in different tissues at different rates, that there are different tissues all forming at the same time. And I find fault with the whole notion of a sequential process. Sure, overall, there's a sequence of things that happen, but they often get there by slightly different routes, and that's part of biology too. So it's all good. Let's see, what else have we got here? Yeah. Okay, so Kevin mentioned the drawing is a good example. It's such a baffling argument to look at that and say it's exact or accurate, as Keith Moore said. Um, it's accurate at a very gross level. I put the eyes here. I didn't put them down here. So yeah, you can say, hey, that's brilliant. He's an artist. Uh, but it's not exact, it's not precise, it's not thorough. It doesn't explore everything. Oh, let's see. Tolkien wrote about the roots of mountains. Yes, he did. So elves, hobbits, and dwarves must have existed. Oh, your logic is irrefutable. Okay, I will talk to my colleagues in geology and tell them you're going to have to replace those boring, stuffy texts with the Ring trilogy. Yeah, sorry, it's just the students will enjoy it more. Okay. The Koran is simply not credible. The fact it gets the odd fact right is not surprising. It was written by people who had studied a little science, but it is worthless as a medical text. Exactly. That the level of science in the Koran is like the level of knowledge you would find about satellites among the general population nowadays. They kind of know it exists. They kind of know they're up there. They know they whirl around the world. That's about it. That's all they know. Uh, and the Quran is doing the same thing with embryology. They know, okay, yeah, babies come from somewhere. People have studied it. Yeah, they know a little bit about it. They did get the lesson right that, yeah, there's the progressive differentiation of tissues, but no, it's not a medical text. It's not an embryological text. And anyone who pretends it is just abusing the text. Yeah, okay. Yeah, I understand the use of the scientific method, right? That that's the key thing. One of my complaints about creationists is you see so many of them who rush to get PhDs and they get multiple degrees and they brag about them, which is just meaningless to me. That I went through the rigor of getting a PhD, many years ago, and I got the idea. I know how to do science. I learned how to do a literature search. I knew how to design experiments. I knew how to interpret the scientific texts. If I were to switch totally, if, for instance, I decide I'm going to become a geologist now, I would not go back and get a PhD. What I would do is I'd start by taking a few classes and off hours here and just get the meaning of it. And then I would read lots of books about it, but going back for a degree, no, I'm sorry. That's just absurd. Okay, Altaf Nizamani qualifies. Says, "Dear sir, I mean Quranic claims. I, but my problem is that there are no Quranic claims here. There's only the most general idea of how embryology proceeds. So you can't tell me that I have to go back and dissect in detail a specific, detailed, accurate claim in the Quran, because there isn't any. It's a poetic text. Um, let's see. Uh, oh. You don't deny that geology exists or that the world is billions of years younger than the Laura say. Yeah. You don't have to be an expert. Exactly. I presume most of my audience are people who have an interest in science. There's a few of you who probably have advanced degrees in something, but you can get a good working knowledge of a scientific discipline just by, casual study in off hours. And that I encourage. That's a great thing. The problem is that these creationists have got this mental block. They can't learn this stuff because they have absorbed a very literal interpretation of the Bible that they cannot allow anyone to preach against. Okay. Yeah, my throat is a little bit clogged here because it's early morning and I haven't been practicing talking for an hour. Okay, Terry Pratchett's Discworld has mountains, so the Earth is flat and on a giant turtle. Oh man, I am just learning so much here today. Yeah, let's see what else have I got here. Uh, oh, the Koran says that there was a global flood. I don't think that's true because it is not a premise of most Islamic thought that there was a global flood. They believe there were local floods, but they don't have this kind of bizarre obsession with a global flood. That's a weirdly Christian thing. Okay. Yeah, I've mentioned before that that book by Whitcomb and Morris, The Genesis Flood, started it all, and that was in 1961. And that one tried to justify all of geology, reconcile it to a young Earth that was created in 6 days by saying that a giant flood did everything. And I don't think that most Islamic thought is poisoned with that idea. That on that one, it's for Islam. Again, I could be totally wrong in this. I'm not an Islamic scholar, but for Islam, the idea of a global flood is like the idea of a flat Earth to Christians. It's a piece of the story that we're not gonna go along with. Do you think a PhD should be able to go back to college and get government funding? It should be for those who have not achieved a degree yet, unless the doc wants to pay for it themselves. Uh, I'm not quite sure what that means, but uh, I think all university educations should be free, at least the first one. You go out and get a degree. That ought to be, that ought to be enabled by our government. That would be a good thing. But maybe not multiple degrees. This is sometimes a problem in academic programs. You get students who come in and they never want to graduate because it is so great to be at a university. I knew somebody when I was a graduate student who had been a graduate student for almost 20 years. They got a good thing going. They were doing research, they were publishing regularly. They just didn't feel like they needed to go out and finish up and get that degree, so they kept going and going and going. So yeah, but I think there should be free college education with some limitations placed on it. Oh, so I'm told that there is a verse in the Koran that says that the world is flat and that there was a global flood. Okay. Yeah. I believe it. The book of Genesis also says the same things. It's just how you interpret them. Oh, if any holy book would have predicted snowball Earth, that would have been more accurate. Oh, sure. Lots of things would have been more accurate. That again, that's getting into the details that that what we've got within Christianity right now is a schism between old Earth and young Earth creationists. How old is the Earth? And there are people who say, yeah, okay, I can agree, it's 4.5 billion years old. And there's people who say, no, it's 6,000 years old. That is a fairly simple-minded conflict. Yet if you actually study geology and paleontology and the history of the world, you see that there's been much more complex changes. So that Precambrian snowball Earth is an example. There was a time the planet Earth was just frozen over. And then there was also a later time we had glaciation. We had times when the Earth was much more humid and oxygen rich. And there's been variations in our atmosphere over geological history. You have to pay attention to that stuff when you study the science. Oh, there's a consensus among all Islamic scholars in the past and present that it was a global flood. Okay, that's it. Because I've had Muslims tell me that no, that that's not one of their principles. But I will accept the word of an ex-Muslim who's experienced it. You know more better than I do. Yeah, that it's a whole problem with fundamentalism and literalism that it feels like you're on a slippery slope. Once you accept this stuff, is you go sliding down until you got a whole bunch of people who believe absolutely and with utmost certainty that the most ridiculous interpretations of their holy book are the truth. And yeah, that's a real problem. I wonder why the Koran did copy many stuff from the Bible and said clearly Jesus was there and Bible is there as well. Well, of course, it's uh, uh, Islam is an addition to the Abrahamic tradition. And you gotta respect your past. So it's just like the Mormons call themselves Christians and they accept the Bible. All they've done is they've added a bunch of new interpretations to that. So Muhammad took the Abrahamic tradition, Jewish and Christian thought, which was common in the 7th century, and expanded on it, added to it, added his own interpretations. Oh, have I heard of James Tour? Yes, I have. He's ridiculous. Yeah. Maybe that could be a later subject, is the whole weird revisionist attempt to throw out modern biology and replace it with his new synthesis. And I'm not impressed with his work regarding abiogenesis. He ignores the majority of the science that is out there. Okay, yeah, I'm trying to avoid these kind of blanket statements, but I'm told, okay, they're lying, dishonest, and untruthful. Yeah, if you're a fundamentalist, literalist, Christian or Muslim, you are dishonest and untruthful. Just like in that confrontation in Dublin, I had these people just earnestly, sincerely trying to tell me that, oh no, the Koran is a good science text and it's accurate and it's true. And oh, look, Keith Moore said so. And yeah, it just doesn't work. Yes, Judaism and Christianity and Islam all came from the same culture, the same Middle Eastern cultures. So there are common threads uniting them all. And then unfortunately, because we're walking, talking apes, we tend to focus on the little doctrinal differences and the interpretations and get all out of sorts about it and throw bombs at people for not believing that Jesus was the Son of God and so forth. Okay, it is perfect. It's almost 7. I think this is a good place to stop. I've been talking for an hour. As I've said before, I'm trying to limit these live discussions to just an hour because I think that's a nice tidy time. It's also when my internal clock starts going off. I'm a college professor. I am so bred into hour-long lecture slots, and just poof, we do that and then we're done. So it works well with my brain. So I think we will end the stream right here. Thank you all for showing up. Ooh, 39 concurrent viewers. That's pretty good for me. Okay. Yeah, so that's a great place to stop. And we will talk to you all next week. I'll think about what I have to do. I also have to do something on Wednesday. So I generally will do a 3:00 Wednesday afternoon Evo Devo thing. I'll probably play some more games Friday evening. Yeah, I'm trying to get a rhythm going. We'll see. All right, everyone. See you all later. I'm ending. Good day. Get to work now. You're up bright and early. It's time to be productive.